Before the first European ship ever reached the African coast, the trade had already been running for 200 years. Before the word slavery became attached to one ocean, one route, one set of perpetrators, another system had already moved millions of people across 2 continents and an entire sea. It lasted 1,200 years. It took an estimated 17 million human beings. It crossed 2 oceans, 3 continents, and dozens of kingdoms. And today, most people on Earth have never heard its name. This is the Arab slave trade, and the people it took, their names, their villages, their children, their futures, deserve to be remembered. It began around 650 AD. Arab traders had established routes across the Sahara Desert and along the East African coast long before the first enslaved African ever crossed the Atlantic. They were not raiding at first. They were trading cloth, metal, tools, spices, moving in both directions along the coast. West African kingdoms exchanged goods with Arab merchants for generations. East African coastal towns grew wealthy from the commerce. But somewhere inside that trade, a calculation was made. Human beings became a commodity, and once that calculation was made, it did not stop for 12 centuries. The routes ran in 2 directions simultaneously. From West Africa, captives were marched north, across the Sahara Desert, a crossing that took months, through heat that killed the weak before they reached the first oasis, through sandstorms that buried entire caravans alive, through thirst that turned men into bones before the next water source. Historians estimate that for every person who survived the Saharan crossing, at least one died on the way. Those bodies are still there, beneath the sand, unmarked, uncounted. No memorial stands above them. From East Africa, captives were loaded onto Arab dhow vessels and sailed across the Indian Ocean to Arabia, Persia, the Ottoman Empire, and India. The dhows were not built for human cargo. They were built for goods. The captives traveled as goods. Zanzibar became the center of the Eastern trade, a stone island off the coast of Tanzania, with a natural harbor, an established Arab sultanate, and a slave market that operated openly in the center of the city. At its peak in the 1800s, between 40,000 and 50,000 enslaved people passed through Zanzibar every single year. Families were separated on that stone floor, mothers and children divided by transaction, men assessed like livestock in front of buyers, women taken for domestic service, many taken for worse. The market operated for centuries, in broad daylight, with architecture built specifically for the purpose, stone holding chambers below ground where captives waited. Narrow, dark, permanent. The men and women taken into Arab slavery did not disappear into one kind of life. They disappeared into many. Some were taken as domestic servants into wealthy Arab households across the Middle East. Some were forced to work the clove and date plantations of Oman and Zanzibar under conditions that killed them within years. Some were taken as soldiers, entire military units of enslaved East African men, forced to fight wars for empires that owned them and buried them in foreign soil. And a significant number, historians estimate in the millions, were taken as eunuchs, castrated before transport, to serve in the harems and palace courts of Arab, Ottoman, and Persian rulers. The survival rate of that procedure was devastatingly low. The demand never stopped. And through all of it, through 1,200 years of documented, organized, institutionalized human trade, the people taken had names. They had villages. They had mothers who remembered their faces. They had children who waited by the door. They had languages, ceremonies, songs, and histories that stretched back further than the empires that swallowed them. A woman taken from the East African coast in the 900s had a name. A man marched across the Sahara in the 1300s had a family compound, a language, a song he knew from childhood that nobody in Arabia would ever hear. A teenager loaded onto a dhow in Zanzibar in the 1800s had plans for his life that ended on a stone market floor. We do not know those names. We were never given them, because the system that took them had no interest in recording who they were, only what they could be used for. Britain formally moved to abolish the East African slave trade through treaty with the Zanzibar Sultanate in 1873. The market was officially closed. The trade moved inland and continued for 30 more years. Arab merchants adapted their routes almost immediately. They moved faster. They moved smaller groups. They avoided British naval patrols in the open ocean. They found new corridors through the interior of the continent. The last documented Arab slave caravan in East Africa was broken up in 1905, 1,250 years after the trade began. Here is what happened after that. No formal reparations were ever paid to the descendants of the people taken. No Arab government has ever issued a formal apology for the trade. The United Nations has never passed a resolution specifically addressing the Arab slave trade by name. It does not appear in most school curricula, not in the Arab world, not in the West, and not across most of Africa. The transatlantic slave trade has a museum in Liverpool, a memorial in Washington, D.C., and a day of remembrance formally recognized by the United Nations General Assembly. The Arab slave trade has a single stone building in Zanzibar with a plaque outside it. And most people who visit Zanzibar go for the beach. The reason this story disappeared is not complicated. It disappeared because the people with the power to tell it also had the strongest interest in not telling it. Arab nations that built their historical and cultural identity around Islamic scholarship, architecture, and trade did not want this chapter attached to that story. Western colonial powers who depended on Arab alliances throughout the 19th and 20th centuries did not press the issue in international forums. And African nations, newly independent, exhausted from fighting for recognition and basic resources, had a more immediate enemy to name. So 17 million people were quietly moved to the back of history. Their suffering assigned no official perpetrator. Their descendants given no language, no framework, no international stage for what was taken from them. Their names still under the sand. This channel exists for exactly this reason. Not to assign blame to a religion, not to rank one suffering against another, but to say, plainly, with documentation, without apology, that these people existed. That what happened to them was recorded by historians, archaeologists, and scholars across multiple countries. That the silence around it was not an accident. It was a choice. And the choice to keep them forgotten is one that belongs to all of us now. If you have watched this video until this exact moment, you are now one of the few people in the world who carries this story in full. That is not a small thing. Share this video right now. Not tomorrow. Not after the next video. Now. Because somewhere in your contact list is a person who has never heard this. A person who believes the history of African slavery begins and ends with one ocean and one set of ships. Send it to them today. Let them sit with the weight of 1,200 years. And if this story moved you, drop the word remember in the comments right now. We read every single one, because we have covered histories on this channel that will make this story feel like the introduction. And we have not even reached the ones that will make you question everything you were ever taught about who the real villains of history were. Drop in the comments the suppressed history you want us to uncover next. The story nobody in your country talks about. The one that has been buried under textbooks, treaties, and silence for generations. We will find it, we will tell it, and we will make sure the people who were taken, erased, and forgotten finally get to be heard.